So, those are the type of things that made it extremely, extremely tough, right? Because you're making big decisions, right? And it's really only based on the dreams and possibilities that you have for your child.
This is Dadography, a podcast with stories and insights on fatherhood from dads around the globe, dedicated to providing you with the tools and tips to become a better dad. All right. Well, guys, welcome once again to the Dadography podcast. I'm your host, Corey Ward, and today we have Brandon. Brandon, help me with the pronunciation of your last name.
It's Coley.
Cool. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, man. I've heard so much about you via our mutual friend, Vic, and looking forward to having a conversation with you to be able to tease out some insights on fatherhood, man, for sure. Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Man, I appreciate the invitation, man. I'm excited for this opportunity.
Well, if you would, man, tell us a little bit about you, Brandon.
I was born and raised in South New Jersey. Camden specifically is where my roots are. In high school in Pine Hill, New Jersey, my family migrated to, I guess, more so out of the city and into the suburbs. After high school, I moved to Baltimore. I attended Morgan State University, a historically Black college in Baltimore, Maryland. I really went to college with not really a lot of direction other than knowing that I was supposed to go to college. So I went, and once I got there, I hung around for quite some time until ultimately I started working at Verizon, and I have been there for 15 years now. During that time, I recently finished my degree in 2016. So I have a bachelor's degree in communications. Last year, I completed my project management certification. So I'm a PMP certified, and I worked generally in operations in the customer service organization within Verizon. In September, I recently migrated over to Verizon Media Group and pretty much took a leap into a whole new career, which is digital advertising. And now I work as a optimization strategist in digital advertising.
The entire digital advertising, digital marketing world has taken us by storm. So I think you're in a great space there, Brandon, for sure, man.
It's incredible how I even got there, because again, I had never worked in anything digital or marketing or what have you. I worked primarily in operation. I'd done, management, a call center manager positions, but it was a chance meeting with an executive director a little over a year ago. And he knew that I was trying to get to the Los Angeles area where they have offices. And he asked me to, send him my resume and portfolio. I did that, followed up and followed through. I had an interview in less than 30 days. And the pandemic hit, so it slowed the process down. But as soon as they got the green light to start hiring again, I was hired, and I started last September into, almost 15 years into my Verizon career. And I'm in a totally different space now as far as the digital advertising. And it's a global marketplace. I mean, the revenue, the way that it impacts almost everything that we do is definitely the future, man. I'm excited in the space to be here. I not too oftentimes get an opportunity to talk about myself so much. So I gave my timeline, but the core driver as to majority of those moves is my family. Starting with my wife, Tanisha. I've been married to her for over 12 years now. My son, Camden, who is 10, and my daughter, Kendall, who is 7. My son, Camden, his career pretty much kind of drives the decisions that I made in reference to trying to get to the Los Angeles area, just because that's where his career and his job was. That drove my decision to get my project management certification, because that was, something that was in this area as far as jobs were concerned, right? So I made that move strictly so I can move to the Los Angeles area. And then, getting this job with Verizon Media Group also was because I'm trying to get to the Los Angeles area, really, so I could be in a space where the family can kind of rally behind my son and his efforts, and, for him to follow his dreams.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that. And as you mentioned, we'll jump into it later now. Camden is how old?
He is 10.
Okay. Now, when you say his career, I'm super excited to hear the probabilities and possibilities. So we'll come back to that in just a little bit. If you would, though, I generally like to start a conversation with a dad, trying to get a sense of his dad and his experience with his dad. Tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up with your dad.
So for me, I didn't have my biological father in my life growing up. Him and my mother divorced early in my childhood, like before I was one, and he moved. So he lived in other parts of the country where I really didn't have contact with him. I was fortunate enough to have father figures, my grandfathers, paternal and maternal, my mother's father, and also my father, although he was not around or in the picture. My grandparents were extremely involved in my life. As a matter of fact, with the first few years of my life, I actually lived right across the street from them. So, I had father figures, in my life. They just unfortunately were not like my biological father. And then my mother remarried when I was 5. So from that time, I had, my stepfather in the home and up until 12.
No, it's not all black and white. Sometimes there are shades of gray, but we share something in common, Brandon, because I did not have my father in my life until I guess around 16, 17, maybe. But I did have my great grandfather. So I always tell people I did not have my father, but I am not fatherless. I definitely had positive male role models that were able to make substantial contributions. There's not a week that goes by that I'm not mindful of something I say or do being almost identical to my great grandfather. So I feel you there 100%. How do you think that impacted you, man?
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say it's interesting how that plays out, right? Because I see different narratives play out, either in the media or, with friends and other guys that I grew up with situations where their fathers were in the home. And for me, I make an active effort to try to look at the positive side of things as best as possible, right? So I understand, and I still, to this day, I'll say, will hold my father accountable for his decisions and for him not being there in my life. But he actually did re-enter my life, moving back into the area probably when I was about 18. So, from then we had opportunity to establish a relationship. And although we didn't have a father-son relationship with my upbringing, my children benefit tremendously from him as a grandfather. And sometimes I think about it, man, if I held bitterness, or if I had held the attitude to say, well, you weren't there, or I didn't need you, or, that just to have this bitterness and didn't allow the opportunity for my children to benefit from the person he is as a grandfather, I just think that just would have been a misstep, and it wouldn't have benefited my children in a way of them having a legacy, them having the experience, for them to know him in this capacity without my bitterness about what he wasn't to me as a father.
Right. How's their relationship, meaning your kids, with your father now? How is it?
I would say awesome. They have their own direct relationships where, they call him on the phone, they call and talk when we're able to go into town. They're definitely one of the first stops because, my father now lives right next door to my grandparents. My grandfather I think he's getting ready to turn 91. So anytime that we're in town, that's definitely the first stop that we make, so very active relationship. They get the benefit of having a grandfather in their life.
That's awesome, man. I think the role of father and moving on to grandfather, if we're not careful, we can downplay it and not give it the necessary credit that it's due. So, and it sounds like your dad made a transition, man. I mean, obviously, whatever transpired, back in the day where he wasn't around is one thing, but the fact that he can make a life change or at least a decision change and be there for his grandkids is pretty significant.
Most definitely. I always knew that my relationship with my grandparents was extremely important, extremely valuable. And I just wanted the same for my kids, if wherever possible. And they fortunately had the benefits of knowing their grandparents, their great grandparents, and, in one case, their great grandparents, for a time. So I feel very blessed and beneficial for them to, have those experiences and to actually see the legacy and where they came from.
Yeah, that's key, man. That's key. I think in some of the previous conversations that I've had with some of the dads, we've talked about how pivotal self-esteem is when it's generated from knowing that, okay, I'm a part of this family. I come from this lineage, or my family is this. It does something to a person from the inside out. Very strong pillars of who they are. If you had to describe your fatherhood style, Brandon, how would you do it?
Agile.
Okay. Do tell. You got me now. I'm curious.
Agile. I am extremely flexible. I am extremely open to new ideas, to thinking outside the box. It's very interesting because I feel like I personally am going through such an evolution in my life as far as growing into manhood. And I feel like really settling into my role as a husband and my role as a father, and really having a better perspective on it, and understanding that, I like to say that my generation has gone through, I think, some of the greatest technological advances that we've seen in time, right? And if not the greatest technological advances, at least the rapid progression of one technology to another. Whereas when I really look at some of the things that instinctively I go to say to my kids, as far as don't do this or don't do that, or this is how you should do this, or don't, I really have to challenge it and kind of think, am I saying this because this is what I know, or is this tradition, or is this learned, or is this, and I really challenge myself before I say, this is how I'm going to do things, because I can't parent them through the eyes of just my experiences, because their perspective on the world is just so different. Everything is just so different from when I was raised, what school looks like, when I think about the subject matter and the content and, just how advanced they are technology wise. It's like the things that we used to spend so much time instilling in foundational type stuff. You kind of look back now and, realize how much kind of unnecessary information, how unnecessary narratives, when you look at how history was taught to us and social studies and how the world works, and how we were kind of trained to go to school and get good grades so you can get into a good college, so you can get a good job and work 30, 40 years and then retire with a pension, and it's like, now I realized that that's all BS. Like, that's just a terrible mindset to have. It's like a worker mindset to have. And it's like, when I parent my children, it's really the kind of thing I'm learning myself to kind of expand my thinking, so I don't pass that type of mentality on to them.
That's really key, man. I think the ability to recognize the changing of the times is really key. I think it's an asset for a father, because times have changed so rapidly. I mean, just being able to say, I remember when there was no internet, right? Like, that's massive in terms
right.
of where we are today, and the fact that it's everywhere, it's pervasive everywhere. People step outside, they've got their phone. They go to work, they've got their phone. Everywhere you go, the internet is with you. Whereas before, I mean, something like a trip to the library looked more like me hanging out at the card index, looking for the Dewey Decimal System, looking for a book and hoping that somebody hasn't already checked it out, right?
Right. So. Exactly. As I was talking, I kind of thought about it. I said the word agile, but I think my purposes as a parent, which would, I guess, be where I adapt my style from, is, I feel like my job is to help my children identify what their passions in life are early. And then guide them how do you make a living off of that.
It's something, man. I've observed that, generally speaking, obviously there's always exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, people that are at the highest level of their respective industry, whether it's, career, sports, study, etc., they usually started that pretty young. There's a guy, big wave surfer, right? Laird Hamilton. Now, this guy will surf a 100-foot wave. Okay. I'm sitting back watching a 100-foot wave from the beach, obviously. But to surf a 100-foot wave, you don't just wake up one day and be like, all right, I'm going to ride that. That's something that, like in his case, I think he started maybe 5 or 6 hanging out at the beach. Right. So when you look at how elite people, and the same thing you can do with basketball, football, etc. When people reach this elite level, usually they've stumbled up on it or discovered it when they were really young. And to have a parent that's behind them is a whole nother scenario, because it's one thing to have your passion, and it's another thing to have your passion and to have a support group for that passion to help you push it along.
It's like little things that are like really simple, like really change and impact the trajectory of people's lives. I had the opportunity to go through therapy, and, in the course of therapy, it's an exercise in, looking back and helping you kind of connect the dots to try to understand who you are, why you are, who you are, why certain behaviors are. And sometimes it may be connected to maybe things in the past or trauma or highlights. But just going through therapy, for me, it's kind of time where you get set aside where you can really just focus on not social media. It's not necessarily focused on being a husband, being a dad, but it's like really time to just evaluate. And in that process, you kind of notice early age, whether it be examples you see around you, aunts, uncles, people in the neighborhood, right? And you kind of see how these things kind of impact you and kind of help shape you. So for me, it's living in the economic or the capitalistic environment that we live in now, where there is opportunities to generate revenue in almost any lane. It's like, why not put my kids in position where they can just do what they love to do and not have to worry about their bills being paid or rent. Not saying that they're setting them up to be billionaires or millionaires or laterally rich, but, doing what you love to do and being able to make a living at it without punching the clock.
There was a dad on season 1, actually a good friend of mine, Richard from Jamaica, and he said that he feels like, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said he feels that his responsibility as a dad is to point his children towards happiness. And what really stood out about that is that I think, the guidepost was not always fathers trying to give happiness to their kids. The guidepost has been, hey, this is the way it's been done. This is the way you should do it. And this is going to ensure that you have success. But success is kind of subjective, right? Because I remember years ago, I do not remember the name of the book, but I remember reading a book, and it started out by this doctor being at an award ceremony. And at the award ceremony, he broke down and cried. And it had to do with the fact that, he was a doctor. He had all these accolades, but ultimately he just wanted to play jazz, man. That's all he wanted, So
Right.
Was he a success? Was he really? So that's something we have to be able to answer as fathers. Are we trying to push our kids for their success or our own passions and successes, or our definition thereof, I should say?
That's the challenge, I think, is people have to come into that realization for themselves. You got to see it for yourself, where you can understand that there's different definitions of what success looks like. I saw something in a movie, and I wish I could, give credit where credit is due here. So I can't remember what the movie was, but there was a line in it that says something to the effect of that, and targeted really specifically to Black Americans, is that traditionally we raise our children to survive, not to live. And that really hit home to me, because a lot of times it's like, I can look back at, my parents, or, say, well, why didn't you tell me this? Or why didn't you set me up for this? Or why didn't you? And it was like, man, you was just trying to make it. Like you just gave what you had, and you gave the advice. And coming up, it was like, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it was like, oh, well, you had a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, a fire. You know what I mean? Like that's all it was. When there's like a plethora of jobs and opportunities in these different titles, but you never really get exposed to these things. So, I mean, that was part of my issue, if you would call it that. I was having a great time. Why it took me so long to graduate college, because it's like once I got there, I just enjoyed the lifestyle. And I really didn't have any urgency to get to real adult life. So in that case, there was no urgency to get this degree, right? Because it's like, well, I had a job, and at my job, I worked with people of all ages where, this was my job, but this was their career. And when I looked around at the landscape, I'm like, man, well, I'm doing pretty well in reference to salary, even in comparison to my peers that have degrees, right? So it just it just wasn't making sense to me, right? And it kind of put me in this spiral that by the time I had kids, it was like, nah, I'm not signing them up for this. Unfortunately, I married a partner that was on the same page. My wife was on the same page, and we both felt like working in jobs were whack. Even though we had to participate, but it's like we didn't want that for our kids unless that was their choice.
Yeah, one thing I always encourage my kids about is to be learners. I think, and again, this is always subjective, right? But I think one of the responsibilities of a father, amidst all the myriad of responsibilities that a father has, is to help his children fall in love with learning. I think if he can score that goal, the kids are good to go, because it's not so much that a person has, and I'm hearing you, right? So it doesn't sound like you have any problem whatsoever against education. And maybe you have an issue with the way that education is presented, the way that it's packaged, the way that they're told they're supposed to pursue it, and then what that manifestation of the education looks like, whether it's a doctor, lawyer, engineer, etc., yada, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those scenarios where if a father can encourage his children to love or get them to fall in love with learning, he's done a great thing.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because there is balance, right? I don't, want to come off as, not encouraging going to college, but I don't want it to be the only lane that they have. Right. And I think for me, even if somebody maybe presented it to me different, at the time, I felt like, here's my track. And, in the same vein where I had to go to high school, it's like, oh, well, next step is got to go to college, even though I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I remember taking one of these quizzes with my guidance counselor in high school, my senior year, and you answered these questions, and the questions were color coded. And at the end, you tallied up your answers, and it told you what you should be, what you should do with your life. And mine came out and said I should be a radio or TV personality. So I went to college, and I now have a degree in communications because of that test, right? Like that's why I have the degree, right? And so many of my peers who I know went to college that same way, right? It was like, here's something you have to do to get ahead to move forward, even though it's not my passion, it's not really what I want. And that for me kind of helps with that's the piece that I didn't want for my kids. It's like, hey, if you're going to college, like go into it knowing here's what I'm here for. Here's what I want to get out of it.
Corey here, wanting to give you a personal invitation to follow us on Instagram. You can find us at Dadography Podcast. It's really good because you get an opportunity to put a face with the voice that gave you some insight or some encouragement on your journey in fatherhood. We look forward to having you follow us on Instagram at Dadography Podcast.
So let me ask you this, Brandon. Based on my conversation with Victor, you guys were in South Carolina, and then there was a transitional period to LA. Maybe your wife and your son went to LA. You were in South Carolina. Help me to understand the whole transitional phase, what that looked like, how did it come to be, the whole nine.
Yeah, it's been a journey. So in 2014, I had the opportunity to make a lateral move with my job to transition to South Carolina. I took the lateral move because at the time we had a home that we owned in Baltimore. And this was the first home me and my wife purchased. My son and my daughter born in his house. Our first home, right? It had a lot of sentimental value, but just at my job, I felt like I hit kind of a ceiling. And then financially, I wasn't able to move to something different. And with having kids, I wanted to move out of the city and into a different area. Moving to South Carolina, even though it was a lateral move without a change in salary, the cost of living made it like a promotion. So it was an opportunity when we moved there that I was able to get a house with a yard, nice neighborhood for the kids to go to the park, a totally different type of reality, for my kids. After the first year, at that time, Camden was 4, my daughter was 1. After about the first year in South Carolina, Camden really was already exhibiting, like he was always an entertainer, always wanted to dress himself up, dance, put on shows. When he got to school, his teacher had called us in and said, "Hey, Cam's a great kid, but he finishes up his work and then he wants to entertain the class. We may want to find him an extracurricular activity where he has opportunities to express himself." So we found him a local model and talent agency called Diabro there in the area and signed him up for classes where he started going to model and acting classes every Saturday. After about a year of that, he had the opportunity. He won a scholarship to go to the Mike Beatty Model and Talent Expo in Dallas, where he won Child Model of the Year. That was when he was 6 years old. So also on that same weekend, his first book was published. So he published his first book when he was 6 years old. That book is called The Fantastic Adventures of Camden. And that was published through McBride collection of stories. And Hedrick McBride, who is the proprietor, he's the publisher, is a gentleman that I went to college with. So already we kind of had things in the works that when Camden says he wanted to do something, we took it seriously and went full force to say, how can we figure this out to get it done? So we did that with him wanted to write a book, and also when he exhibited, interest in modeling and also acting. That following summer, he went to Los Angeles with the model agency. And that was just to meet some agents and managers to allow the kids to see Los Angeles and just see the experience, to see if this is really something that they wanted to pursue. Camden was signed by a manager and also an agency who said they wanted to put him to work immediately and asked us if we could move Camden to Los Angeles. At that time, me and my wife had a real decision to make because we had just moved to South Carolina like 2 years ago. 2 years previously, my wife had really just started a brand new job. But because Camden was garnering so much interest, he said he really wanted to do it. We had already invested money in traveling to Los Angeles. We had to ask ourselves, well, if we didn't come out here for this, then what did we come out here for? My wife quit her job, came home to pack some clothes, and I moved her and Camden to Los Angeles in the next couple of weeks. And we spent probably the next year and a half, I would say, living kind of bi-coastal, where my wife and son were in Los Angeles and me and my daughter were in South Carolina. And we traveled to Los Angeles probably every 6 to 8 weeks or so.
Wow. So now Camden is he modeling now? What area is he in as it relates to just the industry of entertainment, et cetera, as a whole?
So Camden, things took off when he first got to Los Angeles there. So that was 3 years ago. That was when he was 7, when he initially got there. So he's done work with Disney. He's done a couple episodes of Laugh Mob's Laugh Tracks, which comes on True TV. He was on the season 2 premiere of SWAT on CBS. That was last year. He's done a couple of short films And currently, he is recording as a series regular for an animated series that's going to be coming to Netflix in the fall. So that is his current work. But he also does, ad hoc modeling, also a social media influencer.
Man, that's got to be a huge amount of pride for you as a father, for sure.
Oh man, yeah, I am impressed. I am extremely impressed. It's really his passion, what he loves to do, just entertaining in general. Whether it's acting, it's modeling, it's dancing, whether he's just doing karaoke, he has a certain energy about him that just really attracts people, and he's just really good at what he does. Like I'm his father, and I'm amazed when I see him on stage, when I see him on camera. I'm amazed.
Wow. Well, what was your strategy as a father during the time when, you and your daughter were in South Carolina and your wife and your son were in LA? Obviously, the distance is a factor. What was your strategy, man?
Oh my gosh, I wish I had one. Honestly, I wish I said I had one. We were figuring it out. Honestly, even looking back at it, I really couldn't even give anybody the blueprint as to how to do it, because it just doesn't make sense. I feel like every month we were taking 2 fishes and 5 loaves of bread and feeding the multitude with it every week, because on paper, I just didn't make enough to pay our bills in South Carolina and maintain our house there and pay for my wife and Camden to live in Los Angeles. We're really, at the time when they moved, the rent on their studio apartment was $200 more than what my mortgage was for our 4-bedroom, 3,600 square foot home in South Carolina.
What? Man, man.
Yes. So, those are the type of things that made it extremely, extremely tough, right? Because you're making big decisions, right? And it's really only based on the dreams and possibilities that you have for your child.
Okay.
And really, that's it, because it's non-traditional. It's not. We didn't have a network of people that were experienced, and here's how you do it. I mean, we did have the support and guidance of our model agency there in South Carolina. Our other agencies we still have a great relationship with to this day. They're family now at Diablo, to kind of help guide us, but. When we kind of look at your peer group, most of our friends, their kids are cheerleading or they're doing sports or karate, things like that. When you say like, well, my kid's acting and modeling and, hey, we got to travel here or we got to do this for this audition, there's not a lot of people that's like, oh, man, I know how that is. Right. So especially when you say, hey, my wife's going to quit her full-time job and move to Los Angeles with no job. And I just, with my salary, am going to maintain like it just didn't make sense. Right. But, we took a leap of faith and really believed in our son's talent. It just didn't make sense. But, what's so incredible is that we really have a great network of friends and family. Like our core group, my parents, my wife's, mother and brother, like our close friends and family that we, friends that are family. We just have a great network that support us, that believe in us, that always encouraged us, that talked us through it, and that celebrate with us, when we do get our wins. So, that's really was our guiding light and what helped get us through as a parental unit trying to take this ride.
I'm thinking, for lack of a better term, Camden is a high profile child, right? So with that reality, how has it affected you in terms of being able to discipline him or show him the right way? I mean, because, whatever, we're all human, right? So I'm thinking, okay, Camden at 10, he realizes, hey, wait a minute, I get a lot of attention. I've got people in my corner, lights, camera, action on me. And then here's my dad saying, not a good idea for X, Y, or Z, son. son. And I don't know. Okay. But I'm thinking at 10 years old, with all of the positives that are going on in his life in terms of career, does it make him maybe have a little bit more pushback at times? And if so, then how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think, and that's a fair question, because if I wasn't so involved in like this industry, I would have that thought too. But it's very interesting how, and surprising to me, like how regular people, down to earth people are. Camden, I've been blessed with a child that has a great heart. He's humble in a sense, which, I'm not necessarily always a fan of humble, because I like people to take credit. I want him to take credit for the work and his talent and all of that as well. But no, he's not really that type of child. He wants to help. He wants to play a part in that. You do get into some things too, because he's very smart and he knows that he is a SAG actor. He understands that, he works job and he makes money. So when, he may want something and I may say no, and he's like, oh, well, don't I have money? So he had to, really have real talk and, and explain to him that, okay, yes, here's the money that you make. And of course, with working in the industry, listeners may not know, but children that work in the industry are required to have what's called a Coogan account. What the Coogan account is an account where I believe it's 15% of all of their earnings automatically go to that Coogan account. And that's an account that they don't have access to until they're 18 years old. So that's kind of set in place. So, in these type of scenarios, if a child is an actor or entertainer, their parents just can't take all their money and, do whatever they want with it.
Well, that's a plus for sure. That's a plus.
Yeah, definitely. And it gives an opportunity to say, that he's already kind of has an understanding of how money works. I just recently bought him a book that explains how money works, and it's teaching him about stocks and bonds and Roth IRAs and all of that. So he's reading the book and asking me questions. He wants to invest and buy some Roblox stocks and that just went public the other week. So he's on top of it. And part of my job, I believe, is to ensure that he's on top of it, that he's current on establishing what his future is.
Right. I don't think I ever really knew coming up what I wanted to do. I took this trip. I must have been 17. I went to Anguilla in the Caribbean. My godmother's from there. And while we were there, an elderly lady asked me and a couple of my friends that were on that summer trip with me to help take some groceries upstairs. And when I got upstairs, she had this wraparound veranda. And as far as your eyes could see, you could see nothing but Caribbean Ocean and the sun going down. And my exact thought, Brandon, was, I don't know what I want to do when I'm going to grow up, but this has got to be a part of it. So I think very early I was able to discover that I needed some travel. I needed some beautiful scenery, and I needed to get a sense of peace. I tell you what, the fact that Camden has got you and really, pointing him in the right direction is a plus. How do you deal with naysayers? When I say naysayers, I mean, obviously Camden's just 10. And in every sense of the word has gone beyond what most people would expect from a 10-year-old. But now naysayers are, individuals that will say, well, wait a minute, you and your wife just, riding his coattail. They looking for him to do something so they can live off him. What comeback do you give to them? Or how do you correct that ill way of thinking?
I don't think I've encountered instances where anybody has challenged me with that directly, where I've had to. I guess maybe I've heard things through someone else, but, usually I feel like we're somewhat insulated in a sense by, again, our village, man. We have great friends and family that, even if something was to come to them to get to us, you know what I mean? Like it will never even make it to us because it's just so supportive. And I would just say in the same vein, like, I know peers, parents that spend thousands of dollars on traveling to city, because their child cheerleads or because their child plays football or basketball or what have you, right? And that's That's just parenting. That's just investing in your child and what they want to do. Sometimes for the parent, the dad played football or they love football. You know what I mean? So, there's going to be some of that, I think, in the mix with anything as you kind of guide your kids into a space. But I think the career or at least for right now, right? Because who's even to say Camden's going to want to even continue this? But at least for right now, he's generating his own money. He's making an impact on his future at 10 years old that is going to make the difference. So there's nothing really to naysay about that. It's about being open-minded to possibilities and options. It's just being open-minded. I would hear pushback about, because, Camden's career, he's been homeschooled for years. Right. So you get, he doesn't get this. He doesn't get the social X stuff, or, he doesn't go to traditional school. But now 2020 rolls around and everybody's homeschooled. Right. But he was ahead of the curve. Like, he was already doing that lifestyle. Whereas my daughter, had a really hard time transitioning to doing school online and homeschool, because she's like a totally different kid. It's just a totally different experience with her. She's a totally different kid. And, with me being a father, I was extremely naive, understanding, like, just because I'm an only child, understanding like how different kids are. I think kind of maybe subconsciously in my head, I thought once I had one, the next one was going to be kind of a similar type deal. And it is not the same, man. She's her own personality. She's got so much personality. She hasn't exhibited any interest in doing anything that Camden is doing. She is really her own person, man. And of course, me and my wife make a conscious effort to ensure that she doesn't feel a way as best as we can, because we understand that Cam is in a high profile. A lot of times, a lot of what we do and a lot of what she has to sit through revolves around Camden and his schedule. Things are going on. So we do have to make a conscious effort to be aware of that and ensure that she has her moments where things are about her. She feels special and she has her own, so she doesn't, kind of feel dimmed in the light that we should naturally shine on Camden just based on his career.
Right. How is their relationship, man?
Man, they fight like cats and dogs, which for me, I hate it, right? Because I feel like my wife and I, we planned our family in a sense. So, we were attempting to have our son when we had our son, and I was attempting to have a daughter when I had my daughter. So I had these expectations because I was the only child, and I had these feelings of, I was so lonely, and I didn't have a built-in friend, and I'm looking at my wife and my brother-in-law's relationship, and I'm like, oh, look how close they are, and I want that for my kids. And I set them up, man, a boy and a girl. And I think that they would lean on each other and support each other and all that. But no, man, they bicker and fight and argue, and they are at each other's throats from sun up to sundown. But when it really counts, man, they have each other's back, man. When they go to like track practice now, if my wife and I leave them there, I'll look over and I'll notice my son, looking out for his sister and making sure she has water. And, he does the right things, but at home.
It sounds like all things continue to go well for Camden. He's going to have his little slice of reality with his little sister. That is to say, if he becomes super famous, which is certainly in the pipeline, then his sister will help him touch earth again. So, and you touched on it, and I just want to revisit it. How do you guys manage the balancing of, a high profile son, and then your daughter that's not high profile, but, is just as much your daughter as your son is your son? How do you guys manage the balance between the two so as not to slight her or to lift him up too much?
It definitely takes a conscious effort to do. And I think my wife and I had our own challenges, because during the time where we lived apart, I was struggling with not being in the same house as my son. And I know at the same time, my wife was struggling with not being under the same roof with her daughter. So here you have this long period of time where, we were living as if, she was a single mother and I was living like a single father, but I had the benefit of my parents who, once my wife moved to Los Angeles, they gave up their apartment and moved into the house with me in efforts to kind of assist me with raising my daughter. So they were a benefit. But my wife was in Los Angeles, just her and Cam, right? Figuring things out. That was extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. And I still feel like even now, I feel like we're still kind of rebuilding those relationships, because there was a period of time where I felt like I was learning a lot about my son through my wife, because most of the conversations were with her. When we would talk on the phone, it was, hi, Dad. Hey, here's what's going on. Talk, but not really long and depth. You're not really having long and depth conversations with a 7-year-old, 8-year-old. So most of his interactions was with my wife. And, he came out the womb a mama's boy already. But, having that period of time, it was extremely difficult for me, with always wanting to be an in the house, active, hands-on, everyday dad, to now kind of put myself in a position where I'm not in the home with him every day. And on top of that, not even with my wife every day, right? So, it was a tremendous strain on us from a parent perspective, but even greater strain on our marriage.
Camden, if you get an opportunity to listen to this podcast, and maybe you'll grasp this at 10 years old, but I want you to know that you're very fortunate to have a father who loves you to the extent that your father loves you and is supporting your career. Beginning and helping you to pursue things that are really passionate for you. That is really, really a blessing. And years from now, if you don't see it already, you'll see it for all it's worth, and you'll realize that you hit the dad lottery for sure, Camden. So that's from me to you, little brother.
Sure. Oh, man, I appreciate that.
Well, Brandon, I want to tell you how much it means for me for you to come onto the show. And before we wrap it up, I do have a final thought for you, and that is, if there's a dad that's listening to our show, and that dad has a child that is really getting into some area that they're passionate about. I mentioned surfing earlier. Obviously, Camden is in acting and modeling. And, we know that children play instruments and, martial arts. And you mentioned cheerleading and football. What advice do you give to these dads that are raising the next generation of a star or athlete or engineer or whatever the case may be? What do you give to that dad in terms of helping him to shake hands with helping his child pursue their passions?
Yeah, I would say really focus on helping your child identify what their passion in life is. Really pay close attention to what their natural interests are, what their maybe natural talent that they may exhibit, and you really have to invest in that early. In some cases, it could be sports, or it could be the arts, or it could be, math and science or tech, or even a child that, loves playing video games, right? There are tremendous wealth building opportunities and business models for almost any interest. And I would say that it's never too early to start investing in that and understanding what the business models are and start laying the foundation for their future at an early age. If that means whole life insurance policies for your children, it's an excellent way to save money for their future. That is a way to avoid a lot of taxes. It's a high interest bearing type of account. Thinking about their future early will make life a lot easier as far as raising them, that when they become teenagers at the age, things will already be taken care of.
Point well taken, Brandon, for sure. Point well taken. Well, I tell you what, man, I think that about wraps it up. I'm extremely grateful for you coming onto the show and sharing with us about your journey through fatherhood. And we certainly wish you continued success, as well as Camden. And it's been a real pleasure, man, for sure. And I'm grateful for what you shared with us. And I'm anticipating alongside what I've already gotten from you so far to get so much more wisdom. And I'm sure it'll serve the Dadography community well, man. Thanks for coming on to the show.
Hey man, listen, I truly, truly appreciate it. I hope, somebody else is able to benefit a little bit from some of my experiences and testimony that I've been able to share. I would invite and encourage anybody to reach out with any questions. If maybe a parent that might have some interest in this particular career field, if their child shows some interest, we're always happy to share that information. I'd like to share Camden's website is www.camdencoley.com. That's CAMDEN COLEY.com. You can be found at Camden Coley on Instagram and also Camden_Coley on Twitter, and then Camden Coley on Facebook as well. Of course, my wife and I run his social media feed, so you can contact us via those mediums at all. And, we'll be happy to talk to you and share whatever knowledge that we can have.
Even though Brandon didn't have an ideal father-son relationship with his dad during his early upbringing, he decided to not hold on to all of the whys later in life, and his children are now reaping the benefits of having a relationship with their grandfather. Brandon challenges those instinctive parenting decisions to make sure they are not based solely on old traditional thinking, making sure a modern perspective is considered. Yes, many decisions will be made based on the dreams and possibilities you have for your children. Remember, Cisco? I'm willing to shift my priorities in my life to accommodate, to make sure that my child has what they need, and then me. Brandon clearly lives this every day. Lastly, double check your network of friends and family. Make sure they have yours and your family's best interests at heart. You can't do it all by yourself, especially if you don't always know how you are doing it. And truth be told, that's a lot of us, including myself. Thanks a lot, Brandon. We appreciate you taking time out for this conversation. See you guys next week. We have another great one coming up.